Okay, it's 2 past the hour. We're going to kick things off here. Hello, everyone. I'm Suzanne Boyd, founder and CEO of Anthro-Tech. Thank you so much for joining us for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Today, we are tackling a critical procurement or purchasing challenge, which is how to buy accessible software and how to make defensible decisions when a product isn't fully accessible yet. For a lot of organizations, including a lot of organizations in the room today, this is no longer a future concern or a someday issue to worry about because accessibility, you all know, is tied to legal compliance, public trust, equity, and risk. But anyone who has been involved in buying commercial off-the-shelf solutions knows the reality can get complicated pretty quickly. During the purchasing process, you might receive an accessibility conformance report, you might get a roadmap, you might hear, we're working on it. And then the real question becomes, how do you make sense of all those signals and decide whether a vendor is truly committed to accessibility and not just compliance and checking a box? So today we are going to break down what buyers should ask for, what vendors can reasonably provide, the red flags to watch for, and how to manage accessibility long after the contract is signed. So, and I'm so pleased to have this fantastic panel with us today representing government, enterprise products, and hands-on consulting. So excited for the conversation, and I'm so glad all of you are here to be part of it as well. So we're going to start with some introductions. And Kim, if you could kick us off with intros.
Thank you, Suzanne. So happy to be here on GAD. My name is Kim Dowden, and I am a senior project manager with the city of Seattle. I've been with the city for about 10 years, and I've been working on digital accessibility efforts for the last 2 years. And I'm currently leading our citywide digital accessibility compliance project, where we're focusing on meeting compliance, but also establishing accountability structures so that our products and services are accessible moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here, Kim. Let's go to Marianne.
Hey, Suzanne. And hi, everyone. I'm Mary Ann Jawili. I do go by MJ, and I'm a senior principal accessibility product manager at ServiceNow, where I focus on internal accessibility and supporting our employees with disabilities. I'm also working on supporting. I'm supporting our user research panel that includes our employees with disabilities.
Amazing. Thank you for being here, MJ. Let's go to Jacqui.
Hi, I'm Jacqui Tolisano. I am Senior Director of Product Accessibility at Salesforce. I've been with Salesforce for just over 4 years, but I've been in the accessibility space since 2012. And I own several programs that help ensure our products are as accessible as possible, including running our assessments and ACR program.
Great. Welcome, Jacqui and Sruti.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Shruti Vijaykumar, and I am a digital accessibility specialist at Anthro-Tech. And I support government agencies with all things accessibility. So audits, document remediation, training and coaching, and also helping accessibility become a sustainable part of the process. And I've also worked with teams that review ACRs and are trying to make more informed decisions about vendor evaluation and ACRs in the procurement process.
Thanks for being here, Sruti. All right, a couple of housekeeping items, everyone. You can submit questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to collect them throughout the session, but leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions and have a live Q&A session. And before we jump into our conversation, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So we're going to bring up an audience poll. There it is. So please let us know, where are you most often involved in accessibility and procurement? There's some answer options for you there. Okay, all across the board here, which is kind of what we were expecting. A range of answers. And that's why this conversation matters, because accessibility procurement isn't just owned by one person, it's touched by many people, right? Procurement, legal, IT, product owners, accessibility specialists, and ultimately the people who have to work with the products that we end up purchasing. So let's get started here with our first question for the panel. When a government agency is considering a COTS solution, there's a lot more to understanding accessibility than simply asking for an accessibility conformance report. The real question is whether people can use the product and whether the vendor is prepared to be a strong partner going forward. So, question for you, Kim, from the government side, what are you looking for before the city makes a purchasing decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to your point, the ACR is really what we consider just the bare minimum. That's the requirement. But what we're really looking for is, do they have accessibility as a core value in their products, in their organizational structures, in their product life cycle? Do they publicly have a statement for inclusion accessibility that's on their website? Do they publicly post their ACR? These are all things that build confidence. Do they work with cities? Are they going to work with us? If we have, for example, a customer that is challenged with using their product, are they going to partner with us in hearing about that experience and building it into their product lifecycle? So for us, it's more about, are they truly committed? Can they demonstrate that? And do we feel confident that even if they have an ACR, how are they going to show accessibility and their commitment to accessibility moving forward? Are they going to keep it updated? How often do they update it? So all of these things, again, the ACR is the bare minimum, and we want to have a conversation to learn more about them.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you're looking at the values of the organization, the culture,
Right.
processes, all of that.
Absolutely.
Wonderful questions to ask. And Shruti, a question for you. When agencies come to Anthro-Tech to help them review products or improving procurements, where do you see them getting stuck?
Yeah, sometimes the point where people get stuck is at the very beginning, where it's what even is an ACR and what is it supposed to tell me? And how do I know that this is a good quality ACR or not? And it is a very technical document and it's difficult to interpret for many people. So I think the analogy I like to give is when you're learning a new language and you learn a few phrases like hello and how are you, and you say that to a native speaker, and then they speak full sentences back to you, and you look around and you don't know what to say next. It's similar to that, where the initial there's at least 50 different criteria or individual roles that you might have to review because that's how many guidelines in A and AA there are, and you might have to review that. And if accessibility is not part of your day-to-day job, knowing what 1.3.5 identify input purpose means and whether or not the product supports it or not is confusing. And so I think that technical piece is where I see many people getting stuck.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you kind of act as a translator for organizations, helping them interpret that. I'm curious, MJ and Jacqui, representing sort of the product side today, what do you wish buyers understood about accessibility in large enterprise products? And where is the process perhaps more complex that we're able to see as buyers? Let's start with you, MJ.
I would say that for maybe just to start, when you're talking about like enterprise products, like you should know that accessibility is especially complicated in large enterprise products. You might be coming in and saying like, hey, your color's a little off. We need you to increase the contrast. And believe it or not, sometimes changing the color contrast might involve like working with 2 or 3 different teams. And it may take, I don't know, like a month or two to get that change rolled out. So I would kind of start there. Also, just know especially if, like as Shruti was mentioning, like some people don't know what an ACR is. Remember that an ACR is a snapshot of a product's accessibility, especially with enterprise products. Like some of those audits like happen every year. So it may be like 8 months has passed since that ACR was written. Some of that stuff might be out of date is another thing to consider. And then just kind of going back to how complicated like accessibility may be in enterprise space. This quote unquote simple change that you might be asking for may involve like 2 or 3 teams. It may even involve external teams. Maybe there's an external dependency. It might even cause regressions. Like, for example, some customer came to me once and said, hey, your heading levels are out of order, which is a valid bug. I totally agreed with them. But it turns out when I talked to engineering about it, they said that they could not make this fix without breaking a bunch of other expectations that other customers or they had themselves for the headings to be in this wrong particular order. So in that case, we ended up just keeping that bug, recognizing, yes, it is a bug, it's a WCAG failure, but the cost of trying to fix it was not worth like the efforts of the efforts of fixing the headings. It wasn't a blocker, so.
Yeah, a lot of integrations and complexities within the product themselves. So you can fix something over here and break something elsewhere. Jacqui, any additions from you?
Yeah, one thing that I wish buyers better understood is that accessibility at a large matrixed organization like Salesforce, it's not a simple feature or one-time compliance exercise. It's an ongoing discipline across massive, constantly evolving, changing ecosystem. Enterprise platforms have thousands of workflows, integrations, legacy components, and customizations, all of which can impact the user experience for people with disabilities. So from the outside, it can seem like accessibility should be as simple as, hey, meet WCAG and you're done. But in reality, there's a lot of complexity and balancing the innovation speed, technical debt, third-party dependencies, and the needs of very diverse user groups and assistive technologies. Another important nuance is that accessibility maturity isn't just about whether issues exist, because every large organization has some. What really matters is whether accessibility is embedded into the product lifecycle, design
Yeah.
standards, testing practices, governance, customer feedback loops, and actually listening to your customers, and ultimately executive accountability. Buyers should look not only at the ACR itself, but the organization's overall accessibility program and strategy and its commitment to continuous improvement.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So as a buyer, you've got to go way beyond the ACR reports and the documentations. And from the vendor side, I think it's really important to be transparent about how your processes support accessibility, what your values are, and also where perhaps some of the gaps are in the current product. I think that can build confidence for organizations looking to purchase a solution. Which kind of gets me to my next topic, which is, what can buyers ask for before purchasing? So a lot of people in the audience are probably wondering, what kinds of questions can we ask? What kinds of materials might we get? So Kim, what are you asking vendors to provide now? And perhaps where did you make some mistakes in the past and wish you would ask for certain information earlier before purchasing a product?
Absolutely. So the things that Jacqui and MJ have been talking about are just the kind of things that we want to know. Has the company operationalized accessibility within their product lifecycle? Are they transparent? How often do they update their ACRs? And one of the key questions for us is, what testing methods do they use? Do they actually engage with people with disabilities to do their testing? Are people with disabilities and those using assistive technologies included throughout the product lifecycle? So all of these things are things that we can ask. I think as far as mistakes we've made, absolutely. So we're just starting to operationalize accessibility within our organization. And so we're educating our staff to ask these questions. But the reality is we didn't have checkpoints and we didn't ask these questions previously in a consistent basis. And so where we are today is that we have 80 products that we have to now go back to the vendor and ask for those ACRs. We have to understand gaps. And so absolutely, I think our lesson learned is ask these things up front and make sure it's really part of again, how they operate and their values of the company, not just the ACR and a compliance checkpoint.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Shruti, when you're working with organizations who are evaluating a solution, what would you recommend they request from a vendor beyond the ACR?
Yeah, the ACR is a great conversation starter. It's not everything, and so we have to go beyond that ACR. It's a good sign of, if you're reviewing the ACR and you have follow-up questions, you can get a sense of how mature that organization is. But you can ask a few more things. If you want clarity on something you've noticed in the ACR, you could ask for demos and walkthroughs with assistive technologies to get a clearer picture of what that looks like and sounds like. And you can also ask vendors questions about ownership. So who fixes accessibility defects? And if there's a new release and there's an accessibility issue, how do we tackle that? Or who's doing the testing after these releases and updates? And who's responsible for accessibility of customizable components? Because we have to realize that not everything can be put on the vendor, where the core product and the accessibility of that core product is something that we can expect the vendor to maintain the accessibility of. But if the agency, a government agency, has staff that's adding inaccessible content onto that platform. So for example, if they're adding inaccessible PDFs, or if they're adding forms which don't have descriptive form labels, those are accessibility issues introduced as you're adding content. And so we have to know who's responsible for which kind of issue, and clarifying that early on is a good idea.
Yeah, I love that point that accessibility should be a shared responsibility. We're going to come back to that. I'm curious to hear from MJ and Jacqui, what's reasonable, right, in terms of the number of questions that a potential customer asks you, and what kinds of questions are harder to answer, especially for these large, intricate enterprise platforms?
I can take a stab at that. I will say that those are all reasonable requests. In fact, I strongly encourage our customers to ask such questions, just because, I mean, you don't want to be in a position like Kim was describing, where you have like 80 products that you're now trying to wade through and assess for accessibility. I do think also these questions, like going beyond ACRs, really push vendors to go beyond compliance. And that's really what we're all about, like supporting people, and making sure our products work for everyone. So I guess just going back a little bit, like in terms of how many questions, ask away. We actually at ServiceNow, we have an RFP document of like, that's over 90 pages long, and it's got a bunch of like common accessibility questions and answers to help our salespeople get through a lot of these questions that we already anticipate from customers. We have talking points that we've created, PowerPoints that we've created for people out on the field, because we anticipate this and we welcome these questions. And I guess similarly, we ask the same questions to people that we want to buy software from when we're doing procurement ourselves. And so I posted this on our community channel, our community forum, but we do have these publicly available accessibility questions that we ask vendors.
Yeah, that is good to hear, Jacqui. Any additions to that? Anything like, don't ask us this, it's unreasonable request?
No, and I'll just concur too, is that these are all really reasonable requests, and we encourage those. And I think any mature organization would encourage it. And it's more about a conversation, right? So, at ACR, ask away, and if you have any questions about the ACR, happy to answer them. If you want to know more about our testing methodologies and protocols, if you have a specific inquiry about a known issue, any, remediation plan, plans about something that we're not getting quite right. And if you're looking for someone to speak to directly, those are all things that, we encourage. And then these conversations, they tend to be really successful when they're collaborative and focused on understanding the risks, understanding, critical workflows, and then operational realities of accessibility rather than expecting perfection. Where it gets more challenging for large enterprise platforms is when buyers expect a single definitive accessibility answer for every possible implementation or customization. In many enterprise environments, the accessibility experience can depend heavily on configuration choices, third-party integrations, custom code and workflows, and even the customer's own content practices. So while the vendors can and should speak clearly to the accessibility of the core platform and provide guidance, there are limits to what we can guarantee across every unique development scenario. That's why ongoing partnerships with clear support paths are often more valuable than treating the procurement review as a one-time checkpoint.
Yeah. So to that point, I'm curious if an accessibility or a product owner comes to you, Kim, a company, and says, our product is 100% accessible. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
That's a red flag. I mean, it sounds great on paper, but we know that nothing is 100% accessible. So again, I think for us, it's that transparency and actually being, honest about gaps and sharing the product roadmap. And so even with that, we know that product roadmaps can change, but we really want, again, to Jacqui's point, that collaboration and that communication and partnership.
Yeah. Any strong trust signals that a company might send your way?
Yes, absolutely. So again, trust is being transparent, acknowledging where there's gaps, really, again, being transparent about sharing their commitment to accessibility, publishing that, and again, being open to discussions. So, hearing what challenges we may have and working with us through that. And again, on our side, we need to be understanding of, as Jacqui mentioned, large organizations can't do things quickly. So all of those things really would, generate trust.
Yeah. And Jacqui, from your side, what are some credible trust signals that a mature organization can offer?
Yeah, I completely agree with Kim that trust comes less from the existence of an ACR and more from the maturity and transparency behind it. For me, strong trust signals are when a vendor can clearly demonstrate that accessibility is operationalized across the product lifecycle and not isolated to a once-a-year audit. That looks like having accessibility requirements baked into design systems, engineering standards, QA processes, release criteria, and procurement for third-party components, right? It's our responsibility if we want to embed it that, we make sure we do our due diligence. And it also means involving people with disabilities in testing, investing in employee training, and having executive sponsorship and accountability. Another major trust signal is the transparency that we're speaking about at a high level, where mature organizations are usually very willing to discuss those known gaps, to explain the trade-offs honestly, and share remediation priorities and talk concretely about how customer feedback influences the roadmap. Ironically, a vendor that claims to have zero accessibility issues can sometimes create more skepticism than confidence. Because anyone building large enterprise platforms knows accessibility is an ongoing journey. What builds confidence is evidence of continuous improvement, responsiveness, and a culture where accessibility is treated as part of product quality and customer experience, not just a documentation created for procurement.
Yeah, those are really excellent points. And many products, unfortunately, not unfortunately, they have to be procured through a very official procurement process where conversation and collaboration isn't always possible. So, question for you, Shruti, if someone has only 30 minutes to review vendor accessibility materials, what should they look for first?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that 30 minutes would not be enough for a deep dive into accessibility, an accessibility review, but I do understand the intention behind that question. And I would say, even before you jump into any of the materials, just zooming out and looking for, I think, the things that Jacqui and Kim and MJ have mentioned so far, where you're looking for cues in communication. Is there trust and transparency? Are they demonstrating that accessibility is part of their operations? And of course, keep an eye out for all of those things and make a note of that. But also ongoing compliance. So if they have any remediation plans, great, take a look at that. But if you're being realistic, not all vendors will be able to provide that. And what they should be providing to you and what you should expect from them is at least an ACR. And so if I had 30 minutes and I wanted to just jump into some of those details and get a quick judgment on what I'm seeing, these are a few things that I would look for. I think one of the first things is to see if my agency's policy matches with the standards that are used in that ACR. So what I mean by that is most state and local government agencies would have the requirement of compliance with WCAG 2.1 A and AA, because that's part of the Title II requirements. And so making sure that the ACR that you have received has those guidelines and the product has been tested against those guidelines. That's the first thing I would check. After that, I would check how up to date the ACR is. So if it's products keep updating, there's new releases and it can change. So if for example a hardware product, there can be an older ACR for an hardware product because it doesn't update as often. But for maybe a software or a web product, they update often and there's new releases often. So I would make sure that it's more recent, and anything more than a year is something I would ask questions about. So checking that date is important. Next,
Yeah.
I would also check the evaluation method. So is there manual testing involved or not? Because automated testing cannot capture all of the issues, and so we need manual testing. So I would look for that as well. And of course, remarks and explanations would be the last thing. I would check if I have just 30 minutes. Is it descriptive, unique, and it's not repetitive, like work in progress for all of the table rows that I see. So yeah, those are a few things I would check for if I had just 30 minutes.
Yeah, great points. And Kim, you mentioned earlier in an earlier conversation that you at the city you're trying to like operationalize some of these things as part of the procurement process. What are some of the things you're tackling right now?
Actually, we are working with Shruti to develop some resources for our staff. So I love the tips that she talked about, and we're trying to put together a rubric and a checklist so that if you have only 30 minutes or a short amount of time, you have a guidebook, if you will, and a checklist to go through looking at that ACR and seeing how does it compare with what we really need. So that's a big part of it, is educating staff and giving them tools, because I think, there's a fear out there that I don't really know what to do with this. So we're really trying to educate our staff as part of our operationalization.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. We hinted earlier at the fact that making services accessible really should be a shared responsibility between the vendor and the purchaser or the organization using that solution. Kim, how do you think about that balance, partnering with vendors while still owning the city's responsibility to the public it serves?
Absolutely, and we acknowledge that we own that experience. We are providing services to our community, to our constituents, and it's the city's responsibility to make sure that our products and services are accessible and inclusive. So ultimately, it's our responsibility, and in part of that, we need to make sure that we're making good purchasing decisions, that we're holding vendors accountable, that if something isn't compliant, and we know there's gaps, making a plan to provide access. So we've developed an alternate access plan, a template, and a process so that we have documented how we're going to assist someone who might be struggling with a product or service. That shared responsibility, I think it was mentioned earlier about, there's some things that the city owns. So in a platform, the vendor has platform, but we can configure a lot. And I think Sruti mentioned this earlier. One example is that we have a platform where it generates PDF documents, and we own that configuration, and we have to make sure that those PDF documents are accessible. So it takes a partnership, and we might have to work with the vendor on how to do that, but we have to own that. So we're trying to educate our staff that you can't just pass it off to the vendor. Like, we have to take some ownership and responsibility as well.
Yeah, exactly. And MJ, from the product side, what are you looking for in a good client to partner with?
Great question. I'm looking for someone who is okay. I'm not saying that I wouldn't absolutely work with them, but if they're asking for 100% compliance, I might come in a little bit with some hesitancy, or just come in knowing that there's going to be a lot of explaining and just some basic accessibility stuff that I'll need to go through with them. I am looking for a client who can speak in detail about issues or features that they want. I also want, and I mean, I'm not expecting someone who's technical, right? Like, I don't expect what I do want is someone who can describe the user experience. At least they can tell me what operating system, what assistive technology they're using, and what they want the outcome to be. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty about why it's failing, any technical stuff like that, or what the solution could look like, technical solution could look like, but I at least want that level of detail from this person, from this client. I also want someone who actually can understand the nuance of WCAG conformance. So, like, going back to my example of heading levels, heading levels being out of order, not the end of the world, technically a failure, but maybe not a severity 1 or maybe not even a severity 2, especially if it's not in a core workflow. I want a client who can understand these nuances and also understand, like, sometimes the stuff that you're asking for is not technically a WCAG, a failure. Maybe it's an enhancement, maybe it's a best practice, and they should be supportive of us prioritizing it as such, because we have lots of customers who are bringing real WCAG failures, and that would be more important to deal with than some of these nice to haves. And then finally, just like, this is my favorite thing about working with customers is when we find a customer who wants to actually co-create together on an accessibility feature. As I mentioned, we do have an accessibility employee research panel internally at ServiceNow, but I also love how we can get our external customers to give us feedback. They have employees with disabilities who can tell us exactly what they're looking for, and we can build a solution that really is not just accessible, but works for them.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Jacqui, anything you're looking for when seeking a partner?
Yeah, so come prepared to talk about issues. So, for example, if you've performed any independent testing on our products, to have a conversation with us about your findings. And if it's something new that we didn't discover ourselves in an assessment, allow us to do our own validation testing to see if it's valid, but also be willing to have a healthy conversation about WCAG. Like, to MJ's point, it's not always a WCAG violation. Where sometimes it's a best practice or it's more of a usability issue, and understanding the limitations around WCAG. And one of the ways that we're mitigating the limitations of WCAG is that we are creating our own Salesforce enterprise accessibility standards that are anchored on WCAG, but also incorporate, the things that are beyond WCAG and the Salesforce specific methodologies and use cases to help us to have a defensible position with our customers. I also think buyers lose trust from hearing about the limitations, or rather feeling like the limitations are being hidden from them or minimized, or discovered late. So in accessibility, transparency is usually a trust builder when it's paired with accountability and a clear plan to resolving the issue. So from the product side, the most effective approach is to be specific and contextual, explain what the limitation is, who it impacts, whether there are workarounds, how critical it it is to the affected workflow and what remediation efforts are currently underway. It's also important to distinguish between issues in the core platform versus things that may depend on a custom configuration, third-party integrations. These are all the themes throughout all our discussion today. Another key factor is demonstrating that accessibility is part of an active, continuous improvement process. So the buyers respond well when the vendors can say, here's where we are today, here's what we're prioritizing next, and here's how customers can engage with us along the way. In my experience, mature buyers are not expecting perfection from large enterprise platforms. What they're really evaluating is whether the vendor is responsive and committed to improving the accessibility over time.
Yeah, it kind of all boils down to being honest and open and transparent and willing to work together to solve for these issues. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to have another audience poll here coming up. We'd love to hear from all of you. What is your biggest challenge when buying or evaluating COTS, commercial off-the-shelf solutions for accessibility? All right. Biggest challenge is verifying whether claims match the real product or managing accessibility after the implementation. That's really interesting. That is where we are going next with our questions, because we want to make sure that our conversation just doesn't end at the point of purchase, because signing a contract is not the finish line. In many ways, that's when the accessibility work becomes real. So MJ and Jacqui, after the purchase, what does a healthy ongoing relationship look like between a customer and the product team? MJ,
I will say that just to start, clarity on roles and expectations, roles and responsibilities, like who is the person on the customer side who is maybe like the accessibility specialist, who is the person who if they have, this isn't always the case, but if they have employees with disabilities who are actually like having these concerns, then maybe we could identify that as well if they're comfortable. On the vendor side, like who are the of course, who is your customer success person, but also you should have like you should know someone on the accessibility team if there is an accessibility team, and you should have their email address and be comfortable enough to like reach out to them if something comes up. I will say that another part of the ongoing relationship and what a good ongoing relationship looks like is having what I would call respectful, clear, and two-way communication. I say the respectful part just because with accessibility, we're impacting people's lives, and I know it can be incredibly frustrating when something doesn't work. And I think just to have a working relationship, we need to be respectful on both sides. And I also want to say on the product side, like maybe you're feeling like all this pressure from a customer to build something, but you're also feeling a lot of pressure from your leadership to build something else that's not accessibility related. And so it might be a stressful time for you as well. So let's try to continue to be respectful. In addition, so what that looks like is like regular meetings with your customer success person, but also if the company has this, at ServiceNow, we have an accessibility product advisory council where we invite all of our customers to join and give us feedback and share ideas in a quarterly online meeting. And it's just been very successful in terms of like getting real information from our customers and understanding what matters the most to them with respect to accessibility. So I would say maybe that, and then also just going back to the co-creating, like if you can, I'm talking to you as customers, if you can not only just recommend ideas or request fixes, like if you can co-create, if you have that bandwidth, I think that's like the best thing that you can probably do, that a great relationship looks like.
So really keeping the conversation going, staying transparent, working together on solutions. Shruti, from Anthro-Tech perspective, what does a sustainable procurement process include, not just for one-time purchases, but across an entire organization?
Yeah, when we when we work with clients with government agencies, we are trying to make the process as easy as possible, as error-proof as possible. Because in the real world, there are uncertainties. People have varying levels of knowledge and accessibility, and there may be people who are champions in accessibility, and then they leave the organization, and someone else might join in their place, and so we want to account for all of that, and so make it as error-proof, I would say, as possible. Uh, one of the things we do is to make sure that we're doing role-specific trainings during procurement. So if it's the procurement team or IT team or product owners, what is it that they need to know about accessibility, and what kind of questions can they ask, and a basic level of understanding that they need to do their work and make sure that accessibility work goes forward. Also, making sure that we are putting governance plans in place. So roles and responsibilities are clear. There's no one champion. Even though there's so many accessibility champions in organizations doing important work, if we rely on them too much, burden them too much, that's not a very sustainable way to go about accessibility. And so making sure there's accountability across roles is important. And we're working with Kim and her team at the City of Seattle. Like she mentioned, there's a rubric we're trying to develop, which will be this repeatable, plain language way to evaluate vendors and make that a part of the process.
Yeah.
I
So the
just
goal
I just chime in there really quick with
Yeah, of
So
Yeah.
just I love where she said, it's everybody's responsibility, and that's something that we are working really hard on, and I think is key for us to be successful, and just really appreciate that it's not one person, it's everyone's responsibility. So appreciate that comment.
Yeah, thanks for that excellent point. I see a lot of great questions in the chat here, so I am going to pivot to that. We've covered a lot of ground. We have about 10-12 minutes, and I'm going to open it up with the first question here, which is from Jana. What is a reasonable expectation for a software vendor on how recent their VPAT ACR is? It seems like 18 months may be too old, especially for software with AI, which is likely changing and getting updated rapidly. Who would like to tackle this question?
I can jump in. So yeah, 18 months can be a lifetime when we're talking about technology. But obviously, the more products you have, the more complex your organization is. It's difficult for us to be able to provide ACRs more frequently than annually. And sometimes we prioritize, our most used products to make sure that those ACRs are always, updated first. So that's why it becomes important for us to have a conversation. So if our, ACR is, more than a year old, to reach out and to maybe ask specific questions where we can say, oh yeah, this is where we're, completing the next assessment so that the ACR is available, but we can talk specifically to all the things that we've remediated on the ACR that you're looking at. So we can kind of update it for you, through a conversation and then let you know when the next ACR is available.
Excellent. MJ, any additions from you on that, or Kim?
Yeah, just quickly, like I think that I can't answer that question because I think that products change all the time. There have been audits where the results came back and then the things and then the result didn't make sense, or some of those bugs didn't make sense because it had changed completely, and that was just in the span of 2 months. So if it's 18 months, fine, but to Jacqui's point, try to figure out their process and how they can resolve issues that you raise.
Excellent. I'm going to skip to a related question, so go out of order a little bit. Has anyone here, and I'm going to include people, attendees potentially, built an AI agent to review ACRs or used AI in that review?
I have not.
I have not done that, but I do think that it is a really good I feel like it's a promising way to review ACRs. I think you still need to be able to understand what the, AI, what the AI is like, like what kind of output the AI is giving you. But it is where I said earlier, it's a technical document, and if you don't completely understand those technical requirements, it's having that translation or plain language can help you. And so I'm optimistic about what AI can do, but I'm also hesitant to encourage it as the way to do it
Yeah.
because I don't know what the outcome would be and if you would understand it.
Yes,
I
love that response in general.
I can speak to this a little bit too. So AI can absolutely be an excellent tool to help create efficiencies for you. But I caution that you want to make sure that the LLM, that the agent or the AI innovation is learning from, has high quality accessibility knowledge and feedback, because you want to make sure that it's accurate and complete. So if you're using AI to review your ACR, you want to make sure that you're not inadvertently getting bad advice. But I will say that at Salesforce, we are innovating with AI, and drinking our own champagne, as it were, and we're incorporating AI into the way that we're working so that we're creating efficiencies. And one of the things that we're doing right now is having the ACR automatically generated as a result of the assessment work that we do, so that we're saving our engineers time, where we can produce more ACRs. So we're not sacrificing any quality, but we are, able to utilize our capacity more. So AI is absolutely an important tool. You just need to make sure that it's accurate and complete.
Used wisely, yeah. Next question here is from Kim. What is a good framework / tool / checklist / questionnaire to continuously measure accessibility?
Well, I can just speak to what we have done on our project. So at the city, this is something we didn't have a centralized, repository inventory of all our public-facing products and content. And so what we have put together is a centralized inventory where we track all of not only our applications, but also content. And we track for all those applications and content accessibility criteria of, have we evaluated it? Have we remediated it? Have we, for those vendor products, have we received an ACR? And not only have we received it, have we actually reviewed it? And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have a process where if something isn't fully compliant, that we need to put together an alternate access plan. And so then we track that as well. Do we have that created? Has it been approved? So that's what we're doing at the city to monitor compliance long term.
Very impressive.
To
sound time intensive.
Yeah.
I have a comment about that. The way that we do it is not great right now. It's across many different systems like tables and spreadsheets. And we recognize that there must be a better way. So we are actively working on creating an accessibility hub, which will allow ourselves first and foremost, because we really need it, and also like our customers, to be able to track audits, track bugs, track customer requests, and also track vendors and their accessibility conformance or compliance. And we're hoping to have an MVP of that out in I think in Q3.
Fantastic. I think this question is related to what you were just describing, Kim. Somebody's looking for some sort of repository for accessibility, conformance, and procurement of third-party solutions. Is there something already available that can be utilized, especially when it comes to higher ed?
Yeah, I can again just speak to what we've done at the city. So we actually, well, we don't have budget, so we developed something internally. So we actually created a Power App. So we have an inventory that we built back end is SharePoint, and then a Power App where it's a user-friendly way to for our staff to enter information and track it. So we again didn't have budget but needed something to be able to understand how compliant are we. We didn't even know, and then we weren't tracking it centrally. So I think you can use tools. We have a large organization, so we knew a spreadsheet wasn't going to hack it. So again, that's why we developed something using the tools we had.
You built it in-house, and it sounds like multiple people contribute to it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Let's move to another question here. This one's from McCall. Do you think government agencies will be able to develop the accessibility maturity of private sector companies that lead in this space when its incentives and the pace are very different? Are we hopeful, Kim?
We are hopeful. Yes, I think that it's just been very encouraging to hear Jacqui and MJ talk about what they have within their organizations, and we've been, working on, operationalization of digital accessibility for a couple of years, and actually, focusing on digital accessibility for probably more than 10 years. But it does take time, and so I think really partnering with other agencies to learn what they're doing, partnering with vendors about learning what they're doing and how they've operationalized it, knowing that we are limited in our resources and time, but absolutely, I think it's possible. And I think if you think about innovative ways that you can work with what you have, again, what we've done is look at where are our tools, what can we use? And a big piece of what we have done is establish a citywide digital accessibility policy, something we're very excited about. It's our staff has been asking for it, and we're just finalizing it. We're getting final approval, but that's a big part of it. It's the commitment from the organization, and so that's what we're really trying to focus on, is getting that leadership buy-in and get everybody thinking about it, because that's the way we're going to move the needle.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with the efforts of the city and really seeing it as a continual improvement process, not as a one and done, and building it into processes and culture. Our last question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, can I just quickly add that I in fact am very hopeful because I've worked with so many government agencies now, and of course even like with City and Seattle, I've been working with Kim, and I just feel so inspired by how dedicated the team is to give access to service and programs to people. And I think that focus on people and customers and is so high in some of these government agencies I've worked in, and I think sometimes that's what really moves the needle. It's that intent and that want to have high impact on real people. Not that and enterprise companies don't have that, but it's just there's I just feel like I've noticed that a lot, and it's very inspiring, and I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, I agree. I want to echo that. A lot of the organizations we work with go way beyond compliance and checking things, truly care for the experience that they're providing for people. Our last question before we wrap up.
Sorry, I actually had a thought about that question regarding what frameworks exist to ensure that we don't build things that get in the way of native operating system accessibility features. That was a question that we skipped earlier. I would say that what that makes me think of is the Born Accessible approach from Jonathan Lazar at the University of Maryland, which is there's many different approaches. But I do think sorry, let me just say, I think the answer there is to actually co-create. I've said this a couple times already. Sorry to sound like a broken record, but it's to actually co-create with people with disabilities and include them earlier in the development process and get their feedback frequently, because those are the people who will be able to say hey, this thing that you're building is actually getting in the way of this other technology other assistive technology that I'm already using. They'll be able to identify that right away. And then you can come up maybe with a more creative solution that actually works with people and the tools that they already have.
I love that sentiment. Thank you, MJ. We are going to wind things down. There's a lot of really cool and interesting questions in the chat, so we might have to have a follow-up webinar. Thank you, everyone, for these questions. For myself, if there's one takeaway from today, it is that accessibility and procurement is more about asking vendors for documentations or checking a box. It's really about understanding the kind of partner you're going to be choosing. So yes, technical compliance matters, but just as important is whether a vendor truly understands and values accessible experiences. So to help you put this into practice, keep an eye on your inbox next week. We're going to be sending out the recording of today's session and some resources as well. And if you have a current procurement challenge or a project you're working on, we do offer one-on-one office hours at Anthro-Tech to help you navigate these requirements. So thank you so much, Kim, MJ, Jacqui, Shruti, for sharing your expertise and your experiences. And thank you everyone here for joining us on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we hope to see you at another webinar in the future. Thank you.